everyone. Welcome to Women Entrepreneurs Radio with your host, Deborah Bailey. I'm really glad that you could join me today. And if you're listening to this on Podomatic, you can also find it on iTunes. So just search for Women Entrepreneurs Radio. Or you can come to the blog, womenentrepreneursecrets.com. And there are links there that you can go directly to the show on iTunes and subscribe, download the show, and share it on social media. And also on Podomatic, which also has different apps that you can download to your mobile devices that you can listen in. So I hope that you will check those out. And also there's an archive of shows going back several years on Blog Talk Radio. It's blogtalkradio.com/CoachDeb. So you can also listen to past shows there as well. Come to facebook.com/Women Entrepreneurs, and you can like the page, and you can also ask questions or post about your business if you have one. That'd be a great place for you to do that. And my site is deboraabailey.com. You can find out more about me, and also, of course, there's links for the show and about my books and different things that I'm up to. So please make sure that you stop by there as well. I think that would be great. And, of course, don't forget to share this show on social media and tell your friends to listen in. Okay, so we're going to get started with my guest today, Lynn Robinson. And she's the author of the book, Put Your Intuition to Work. And she suggests that intuition is our inner GPS. When we listen to it and act on its wisdom, it will point us in the right direction towards success. She knows how our intuition can get us what we want and take us where we want to go. Lynn has been sought out internationally for her intuitive advice and counsel. She's a popular and widely recognized author and motivational speaker who works with businesses and individuals as a trusted intuitive advisor, offering valuable insights into goals, decisions, and strategies. Lynn has authored 7 books on intuition, which have been translated into more than a dozen languages. She has a passion for teaching people how to access their intuition and develop it for practical use in everyday life. And you can find out more at lynnrobinson.com. So welcome, Lynn. I'm really glad to have you here.
Hi, Deb. Thanks so much for having me. Absolutely.
This is really a terrific topic. I'm excited to talk to you more about this. But, before we get started, could you just share how you got started on this path? What were the things that happened along the way to point you in this direction?
Well, it's kind of a story about using my intuition. Interestingly enough, I actually was a operations manager of an IT company in Boston for many years, and I knew it wasn't what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I knew, like probably a lot of the listeners, I knew that I wanted to work for myself. I knew I was interested in helping people, which seemed very vague, and I just couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. So I went to a career coach, and we were talking a lot for a month or so about, what did I like to do and how could I do it, and I just felt really stuck. And the only thing I kept coming up with was that I really was passionate about using intuition. But I was joking with a career coach, and I said, it's like, well, there's not like exactly an ad in the Boston Globe newspaper saying help wanted, intuitive. So I didn't know where to begin. But like I'm sure you're familiar with, she taught me a lot about law of attraction. So I started visualizing and imagining I had a full-time practice, and I had little affirmations that I did. And what happened was the weirdest darn thing. A friend of mine who unfortunately had been sick for quite a while died. And I went to his funeral, and I walked into the funeral home, and I knew that I wanted to sit next to a couple of friends, but I heard what I can only tell you was an inner voice, and it said, sit there, and there was a woman where my attention got drawn to, a woman I didn't know, and I ended up sitting down next to her, and it was one of those, like, what was that all about? And at the end of the service, she and I started chatting, and she said, well, what do you do for a living? Well, I was the operations manager of a software company, but I ended up saying, well, I do intuitive readings. And I was so embarrassed that I had confessed this to a stranger. And the short version of the story was that I ended up giving her a reading, and fortunately it turned out great. And then it turned out that she was a writer for the Boston Globe newspaper, wrote an article about me, and I got 500 clients in the next month.
Oh, my goodness.
So it was all an inner voice that kind of launched my business, which was, over 25 years ago now.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
I know.
That is a perfect example of following
Yes,
your
inner GPS, I know. But see, that really is my theory, is that when we can get clear what we want, and when we're excited about it, we're enthusiastic about it, we're curious about it, that's our intuition saying, go in that direction. And I'm sure you see that all the time as a coach yourself, that when people are excited about something, then that's really, that's the direction that they need to go in.
Right.
Conversely, if they're feeling drained, bored, enervated by something, you wouldn't, as a coach, going, well, I definitely think you want to do that. But see, I think that that's really our intuitive guidance system, our inner guide, our inner GPS, or inner compass, whatever we want to call it here, telling us this is the direction for success. Go with what makes you feel curious or interested.
Mhm. Wow. So, speaking of that, how would you define intuition? Where do you think it comes from?
There's two schools of thought about it, and I think that both are right. The easiest definition about intuition is quick and ready insight, although my favorite definition is from a 15-year-old girl who said, intuition is like when you know something, but like, where did it come from?
Yeah.
And the two schools of thought are, one, that it's more of a subconscious knowledge, something that maybe we've read about, we've studied, we've learned about, we've stored away in our subconscious, and when we need to use it, when we need to make a decision, that information kind of pops up to our conscious level and says, here's a good decision for you, or warning you away from something. The other definition, or the other way that I think that it comes, is more of a spiritual one, that we're all born and hardwired with an inner wisdom that people think, whether you call it coming from God or your Holy Spirit or the universal wisdom. I don't know that makes it a lot of difference, at least to me, but I think that those are the two ways that people think about receiving that information, but both are valid.
Mhm. Well, that's good to hear, because I think some people may resist having it defined spiritually, yet others, that's how they want to define it. So it's interesting. It's not really just one thing. It depends, I guess, on how you look at it,
Right.
as to how you think it's coming from.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that we need our inner guidance, our intuition now more than ever. I mean, our culture, our world is so fraught with change, and so many things that worked, a week ago, a few years ago, just don't work well for us anymore. And we're constantly having to make, especially as entrepreneurs, what decision is right for me, what's right for the planet, what's right for me to be able to be prosperous and to be of service in the world. And those things are constantly changing. So being in touch with that inner wisdom really helps us make those good decisions.
And, for the most part, people call it a small, still voice. But how can you really listen to that when you may be stuck having to make a decision and you've got all those other voices?
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And that's the million-dollar question. But, and I think sometimes people will imagine that they have to go on a retreat for a weekend or a week and kind of sit and listen to that still quiet inner voice. And I really definitely wish it would turn up the volume, even for me who practices this stuff on a regular basis. But, sometimes it's just a matter of pushing yourself away from the desk, going for a walk, just being out in nature, asking yourself a question. The other thing is that intuition comes in many different ways, and we may find that there's a predominant way that it speaks to you versus me, and the still quiet inner voice is one of them, certainly. Other times people describe it as an aha moment. Other people have a physical sensation, like, their gut tightening if they're about to make a bad decision, or some people describe kind of goosebumps or an open feeling in their body if they're about to make a good decision. It might come as a dream. It might come as an emotion. So there's a lot of different ways to receive it. It's kind of hard to define it. In fact, I would say that primarily people will tell me that they had an aha moment. It's like, you have that kind of like, oh, you're just thinking about something and what should I do? And all of a sudden it's like, oh, it kind of pops into your mind. It's like a little different, a little moment out of time. You know that commercial, I could have had a V8? It's like, oh, I just got an aha moment. I don't like that. And I think that intuition comes also when we're asking questions, because we often think of it coming unbidden, like that aha moment. But when you're asking a question like, what's the best way to grow my business? Or what's my right next step? Or what do I need to know about that person I'm about to hire? It doesn't, again, as you just said, doesn't always speak in a big booming voice. But when I find that I ask those questions, I find the answers come more frequently. And so often we focus on what we don't want versus what we do want. And why I like to think of intuition as our inner compass or inner GPS, it really is like that, because when you get in your car and you program the GPS, you're basically saying, here's where I want to go. And it's like that with your intuition as well. You're saying, I want to be a successful coach. I want to be a successful entrepreneur. I want to make X number of dollars a year. And your intuition will go, okay, here's the best way. Let's put the right people in your path and the right ideas in your mind. Yeah.
Well, that seems so easy.
Doesn't it? I know. Wouldn't it be great if we had a little switch in our brain that said, okay, here's the right answer, Deb?
Really? That's true. I think people a lot of times really want that, they just
certainty.
want,
yes,
to come right away without them really having to trust.
Right. And that's the big word, isn't it? Trust. Because it really is. Because I think that intuition is a skill, that the more you use it, the better you get at it, and the stronger it speaks to you, and the more, maybe a little bit more of that certainty that you're making the right decision or not as you practice it. But it is about trust, isn't it? It's like kind of really trusting your own inner wisdom to say, this is a good decision. But, I'm sure you find this in your coaching practice, is that we all get scared before we do something new. I mean, boy, before I started this business, oh my gosh, I was just scared out of my mind. I used to sit in my office and cry before those clients came in. When are they going to find out? I don't know what I'm doing.
Oh.
And I've since discovered that fear is so common to all of us. I mean, not that we're all sitting weeping in our office, but, we get nervous. Am I making the right decision? Do I have what it takes? Will I succeed? Will I make money? Can I support my family? Those are all those fear-based questions that we ask ourselves, and they're perfectly normal. And yet, I think what happens when we stay stuck is that we're expecting that 100% certainty, that big booming voice instead of this still quiet voice going, yes, you will succeed at this. I wish that happened. If I were in charge of the universe, it would, Deb.
That's true. That's what people are really, I think they're looking for, the certainty and just the big moment that tells them this is exactly what you can do.
I read something recently that most people, when they make a decision, are about 60% certain rather than 100%. And that was very mind-opening for me, because even though I said what I just said, I still always want 100% certainty. But knowing that most people make decisions, and often successful decisions, when they're a little more sure than not sure. So that was very liberating for me to realize that most others don't get the 100% certainty either.
Well, that's interesting, because I think a lot of times we think, oh, someone made a decision, they must have known exactly what they wanted,
and they weren't scared.
Yeah. Exactly. I think that's unfortunately what a lot of people.
Yeah, because I've had a lot of people look at you and look at me and think, oh, they've probably never been scared. Here we are. You're hosting this great entrepreneur podcast. Here I've written 8 books, and it's like we never get scared. But at least for me, I'll admit that I still do.
Well, it's true though. You do. You don't have that sense of, I'm not going to be nervous about this or that, but I think it's really definitely a human thing. But for some reason, people want to think there are people who just step out there and do things, and they never experience that, So then they feel less than, because they go, well, they know how to do it, or they, all those things.
But we were all beginners. I'm sure that the first podcast that you did was probably fairly nerve-wracking. Oh, I know. The first time I ever wrote a book, the first time I gave a speech, oh my gosh, it just was very anxiety-producing.
Exactly. You just have to kind of go through the process, actually. Yeah. So when people, want to quiet their minds, I mean, is that really important?
I would say that intuition comes most easily when your mind is quiet, which is not easy. And again, I don't mean that you have to sit there even for half an hour and quiet your mind, but when you're sitting at the desk going, should I do this? Should I do this? I've got to pick up the phone and I've got to answer that email. That's really probably not the best time for your intuitive guidance. So even just, as I said earlier, just pushing away from the desk, going for a short walk, even if it's just down the hall, kind of quieting your mind. I find putting my hand over my heart is kind of calming. It kind of centers me. It gets me out of my logical brain and into more of a heart space about making a decision. Asking myself questions, sitting down, even if I'm doing it in my office and I'm just got a pad of paper and go, what do I need to do right now, or what's the best decision to make? Asking questions, kind of calming questions like that really helps. The other technique that I like is trying a decision on for size. Is to say you've decided that you wanted to become a coach, for example, or that's one of your career options, and so what you would do in this intuitive exercise is just try it on for size to say, okay, I've decided that I'm going to become an accredited coach. And you just feel, how does that feel in your body? Do you get an inner voice? Do you get an emotion? Do you get a physical sensation? And then to say the opposite. Okay, I'm not going to go down that career path. I'm not going to become a coach. And then just see how that feels through all of those little systems. Because, when you try those decisions on for size, it gives you information about whether it's a good choice or a bad choice for you.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
To see how you feel.
Yep, and then try different ways of saying it. I'm going to get more information about becoming an accredited coach and see how that feels. So you can change the question to see what's my right next step, because that's what intuition will often not give you necessarily, 30 steps down the road, but it may give you what's my right next step. What do I need to act on? I tell people to pay attention to, again, what they feel excited about or interested in or curious about, and take steps in that direction. You don't have to know the whole path. You don't have to know, how you're going to get there. You just aim yourself in a direction and then respond to what shows up along the way. Yeah.
And then, yet again, that brings us back to trusting.
Right, yeah. And maybe it's also paying attention to your own self-talk. I mean, if you're saying things to yourself along the way like, oh, nothing good ever happens to me, or I'm really unlucky, or, good things happen to Deb and Lynn, but they don't happen to me, or I'm not good enough, then, you may not be making the best decision. So I tell people to really pay attention to what they're saying to themselves. So I think saying things like, good things come my way. I'm a pretty lucky person. I'm making pretty good choices for myself. I'm getting better at, fill in the blank. I mean, saying things like that to yourself also help you be much more in touch with your inner wisdom. The analogy that I like to use is, I'm sure you've had a good friend or maybe even a coaching client where she's going through a really hard time and you feel like you've got the best words of wisdom and you could really help her. But if her mind is filled up with, I'm not good at this, or I'll never make a good decision, or things just don't work out for me, no matter what you say, what words of wisdom you say, it's not going to land. She's not going to hear it. But if she's in a more open place of, good things do happen to me, and I know I'll figure this out, and, I may be going through a tough time, but I'll get through it. Saying things like that, all of a sudden you're open to the wisdom. And so whether the wisdom is coming from you, it's coming from me, or it's coming from intuition, when we say things that are more opening like that to ourselves, that's when the wisdom can get through.
That's an excellent point. A lot of executives and people, I'm sure entrepreneurs and people, particularly in the media, you'll hear people talking about trusting their gut and that kind of thing. That doesn't seem like people would always say that in the past. Why do you think that's more acceptable now?
Yeah, I think because our culture is changing so rapidly. We don't always have the logic, the facts, the analysis, the big data to make decisions anymore. So I think more and more of us are having to trust our intuition in order to make those good decisions. And that's really why I wrote the Put Your Intuition to Work book, because I think there's a lot of books, business books and other books out there talking about the importance of trusting intuition, but there aren't many books out there that tell you how. And so that's really why I wrote this one, because I really tried to fill it with a lot of techniques and a lot of stories, and here's how you do it, because there's a lot of ways to get to the same right answers.
And that's an excellent point also. You're saying there's a lot of ways to get to the end.
I mean, because again, whether you get it through your feelings, you get it through a dream, you get it through an aha moment, your physical sensations, there's a lot of ways to get the information. But, there's also a lot of depending on the kind of decisions you're trying to make. Is this a career choice? Is this a decision you've got to make right away at work? Is this a relationship issue? You might try different techniques for accessing that wisdom.
So in this case, I guess people who employ other people and business owners who may be trying to find out, well, is this the right person to work with? Is that something they should use their intuition for?
Yeah. In fact, there's a guy that I interviewed for the Put Your Intuition to Work book that he was a CEO of a graphic design company, and he had to hire a chief financial officer, a CFO, and his HR group had gone through and vetted a bunch of people, and they finally decided on one candidate. And the guy that I interviewed said every time I went to pick up the phone to call him, I just couldn't do it. And he said, I'm not typically a procrastinator. That was a very weird thing to happen. But he said, every time I went to pick up the phone, something told me not to. And he said that was so peculiar that he said, I decided to do a background check on this guy, more extensive than the HR department had done. And it turned out that this person he was supposed to be offering the CFO position to had been convicted of embezzling money in 2 different states.
Oh, my goodness.
So, yes, I think it can help you. But, what's so curious about intuition, it's kind of frustrating, is that it doesn't speak with that big megaphone voice, as we've already determined. It didn't come through going, warning, do not hire this man. He's been convicted of embezzling money. It just came through as that gut feeling, or that I can't make that phone call. What's wrong? And so it's a strange process sometimes. But I think, again, when you practice your intuition, it will start to give you, there's that feeling where I can't seem to act on something. What is that? I should pay attention. So you start paying attention to those ways that your intuition communicates. And I've certainly had that happen before myself. Just like, I'm like this guy, not particularly a procrastinator, and yet there's been some things that I just couldn't take action on. I used to work at it was an adult education program, and we had a lot of kind of more personal growth, spiritual folks that were coming in to teach programs. And I was in charge of kind of the logistics for the teachers, and there were some programs that I just couldn't get the logistics. I couldn't make the phone calls, or I kept procrastinating on the paperwork. And I found over being there for a year or two that inevitably those programs that I was procrastinating were the ones that got canceled. There was under-enrollment, or the teacher ended up being sick, or it got canceled for some other reason. And it was like I had a sixth sense. It's like, okay, don't bother working on those because it's going to be a waste of time. It was very weird. I don't know, but that was very helpful, because I was already working about 60 hours a week to be able to say no, this one's not going to fly. I'm not going to put energy into it. It was really a helpful thing. But I also had worked in sales at one time, and so I found intuition was very helpful in sales. I ended up being the lead salesperson in my company, and what I did honestly was, before I made a call, and most of it was on my business was over the phone, I would just sit and I would envision the person that I was about to call, and I would say, is my product, my service going to be helpful to them, and what could I do to, how would they like me to, talk to them? Some people like a lot of facts and figures. Some people just, want to schmooze, or some people just want me to send information, or some people are ready. And I would just kind of tune in to the person, even though I may not have met them, and go, what's my best way to proceed here? And so it's amazing the information you can get back from your intuition when you really practice it.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. And just kind of setting that up before you're even talking to them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of amazing how the information, I mean, what I do for a living in addition to being a writer and a speaker is I do intuitive readings. And so people call me when they're in the midst of change and transition and trying to figure out next steps. And in most cases, I've never met the people. I do it by phone and Skype. And so it's still kind of astounding to me, even after 25 years, that information about that person and their situation can come through so easily and effortlessly, even though we're just doing this on the phone.
Right. Wow. So, you were saying before about people should ask questions of their intuition. Are there standard questions we should ask if we're not sure?
Yeah, the questions that I like to ask are ones that evoke more than a yes or no answer. So if you're asking, should I hire Susie as my office manager? Yes, no. I mean, that doesn't give you a lot of information. But if you're asking questions like, what do I need to know about Susie? Or what are Susie's skills? And what are her weaknesses? Those are really good questions to ask because it gives you more information. And again, my technique is just simply to sit down and with a old-fashioned pad of paper and a pen beside me. I find that works a lot better for me anyway than a keyboard. And I just kind of brainstorm answers. And you will feel like you're making it up, but I have found over and again that even though I feel like I'm making up the answers, that when I evaluate the answers later and kind of after the kind of brainstorming session, the information is very helpful and it turns out to be highly accurate. So some examples of open-ended questions are: how can I grow my business this season? How could I, or what can be done to increase sign-ups to my program? So how could I better understand the needs of my customers, or what could I do to improve the quality of my service, or how can I improve employee retention or productivity? And again, you're just kind of sitting. It doesn't need to be more than 5 minutes or so, and you just kind of write down whatever answers, feelings, words, inner voice. You might get a dream about it. That's another way we often get intuitive information.
So in that case, then how long should a person wait until they feel that they're getting some inner feedback?
It doesn't always come right away, and even for me, who does this for a living. So what I've found is that when I, usually will do this in the morning, I'll kind of ask those questions, and then I'll see, write down anything that I get, but I find that when I go throughout the day, usually I'll get an aha moment. In fact, I gave a talk to a group of engineers, and that was definitely challenging my sense of fear, because that wasn't my usual group, my little logical left brain group of engineers. I usually give it more to kind of coaches and personal growth talks and things like that. But this guy came up to me afterwards and he said, I have to tell you about my intuition card. And I said, okay. So, well, you know how engineers are known for their pocket protectors that they put their pens in? And he said, I put a little 3x5 card in my pocket, and at the beginning of each day, I write a question down, like, how can we produce more widget for our factory this month? He said, was my question this today. And he said, throughout the day, he said, if I've written the question down, I'll inevitably find myself drawn to a conversation, or I'll overhear an interview, or I'll be drawn to an article, or I'll get that aha moment, or something will happen that will provide me with at least one significant answer. I thought that was such a good idea.
That is perfect. Yeah, considering the person.
Yeah. I know. That was the last place that I expected, an intuitive technique to arise.
That's true, but that really is a very good idea and an interesting way to use that. So, and you were talking about things coming in dreams, and I know a lot of times people will say, well, just, sleep on it and think about it tomorrow, or just put it aside. I mean, is that really something people should do, or is that more procrastination?
No, I think it's a really valid way of getting intuitive information. So you could, what I do when I want to dream about something or want to get some information about something is I will write down before I go to bed and keep my journal beside my bed, and I'll just write down a paragraph or two about something I'm concerned about. And then I try to sum it up. I will just say, like, I want information about how to increase my business, or, maybe I'll ask a question, how could I increase my business? And as I drift off to sleep, I just sort of allow that to kind of percolate my consciousness. And then when I wake up, I try not to come fully awake, and I just say, I don't ask, did I have a dream? I just say, what information came in my dream? Because sometimes I'll remember a dream, and sometimes I can't make head nor tails of it.
Right.
But asking the question of what do I understand from the dream, or what did I learn from the dream, or something like that, will often stimulate something, even though you may only remember a dream fragment. If it's something that's a really big issue, I'll find that sometimes I'll have to repeat that over several nights. But that's a really fabulous way of getting information from dreams. And interestingly, there's a lot of people who are inventors and other creative people who have used dreams. In fact, there's a lot of companies now that are actually fostering the idea of taking naps during the day. They have something called napariums in some companies that are particularly, creative, like advertising agencies or other kind of creative groups. But I thought that was really fascinating, because people often will wake up and actually feel like they've got, some information that they didn't have before.
That sounds like some good steps to take in order to just kind of give yourself time to have the answers come to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, there's something I wanted to ask about an intuitive business plan. Why don't you give us more information about that?
Yeah, it's a technique that I have done for really since I started my business. And some of it's 3 parts to it. It's based on law of attraction, so I think your listeners will be familiar with some of this. But the first part is to decide what you want. And, if I could wave a magic wand and say, here's your ideal business life, what does that look like? How many clients are you seeing? How much money you're making? What does your office look like? What product or service are you gifting to the world? Just to really imagine maybe what your ideal week or lifestyle looks like. And I do things like vision boards, or I'll just write it down and, saying as if I already have it, I'll just kind of write it down that way. But I think that, again, following that GPS example, your intuition works best when you can say, here's where I want to go. This is what I want to do. This is what I want my life to look like. So that's step 1. And then in step 2, and I do this every morning, I do a little visualization, which, again, probably most people are familiar with. But what I do is I talk to myself as if I already have it. I mean, I don't do it out loud. I just don't want to scare anybody. I do it in my head. And so it might be, I've got speaking engagements all over the world. I've got, X number of clients and I'm really having a great time, and I get to have fun travel and hang out with my husband, and I have a beautiful office, and I look out into the woods, and, I'll just describe it as if I have what I already want, what I desire. And then the final step, and I still do this with my eyes closed, and I put my hand over my heart because I believe it gets me out of my logical brain. I'll just say, what 3 things can I do today to move in this direction? And I try to pay attention to what comes to me that feels interesting or exciting, or I'm curious about it, because, again, that's your intuition saying go in that direction. So if it comes to me and goes, oh, rewrite your resume, it feels like that, then I don't do it. But it can be something very simple. I mean, it could be sending out an email. It can be making a phone call. It can be reading a book. It can be taking a walk. Sometimes it seems to have no connection whatsoever with a thing that you're visualizing. I had a few months ago was thinking of doing that exercise, and I was a woman that I hadn't seen in a long time kind of popped into my head, and I called her up and I said, hey, you want to have coffee? And she said, I was thinking about calling you because I have a podcast that I want to interview you for. And I didn't even know she was doing one, but a book had come out and I was in book promotion mode, so it was like that was what my intuition served up. But I like that technique because I just figure at the end of a 5-day work week, and you've done 3 things a day, you've got 15 ways to put the energy out there towards what you want. And again, thinking, with the theory that if it's interesting or exciting or you're curious about it, that's your intuition saying that's the path to success. And what a great way to live your life anyway, that if it feels energizing, do it. If it doesn't, don't. And, that may sound like you never get anything done. That's kind of maybe a little more dreary, but like, for example, reconciling my bank book is like my least favorite thing to do. So a lot of mornings, that's just not going to be on the top of my to-do list. But it's really funny that at least once a month it comes up with, you know what, that would feel really good to complete that. So I don't know. That's a technique that works for me. And because I think a lot of us as entrepreneurs are in weird businesses where there's not really a structured roadmap to get what we want. I mean, how do you become a successful coach, or how do you have a successful intuitive reading business? It's like there's not necessarily, here's a handy roadmap and you do these, 20 things over the next 5 years and you too will be a success, because we're all individuals. Some of us are introverts, some of us are extroverts, some of us, what works for you may not work for me. So I think that intuitive guide is really what's there to help us.
Yeah, I think that those are wonderful points, because I know from being in corporate, I guess years ago, when I was at AT&T, they did have a roadmap. You started this level, and then you have to get promoted with a certain amount of time, and then after that, if you really want to go to the next level, these are things you have to do. You have to meet with your manager and maybe do X, Y, Z. So for the most part, I mean, of course, politics was always involved in the equation, even though that wasn't on the roadmap. But, people had a sense of they could control where they were going, And I think that's the thing, when you're not in that environment, you don't have that sense of control that, well, this is the exact way I'm going to go and get there.
Exactly. And I think that that's where a lot of us who are entrepreneurs get very anxious and insecure.
Yeah.
It's like, and it goes back to that trust thing. It's like, okay, wouldn't it be great if there was an AT&T manual for entrepreneurs and say, this is how you get promoted. This is how you're going to be successful. But, for most of us, we have to kind of make it up ourselves. And that's why I like that 3-step action plan.
Yeah, and that really makes a lot of sense for those people who may be missing that structure.
Right. Yeah, I know.
In the company where they knew where they were going, and then suddenly it's like, this is not exactly how it was set up there. So it takes a lot to kind of learn a new way.
Yeah.
So when people don't really pay attention to their intuition, and they kind of feel like, how did this happen to me later?
Right.
What do you do when especially when you have people come to you and they're like, I did this and then this didn't work out, and maybe that may make them feel that they can't really trust what they do anymore. But
yeah, and that's tricky, because I think sometimes we start creating some self-fulfilling prophecies. I'm not good enough, or I'm a failure, and you just kind of keep repeating that, or you get very caught up in your fear versus that trust piece. And usually I find that, well, again, I think that intuition is a skill, that the more you use it, the clearer it gets. But I think to me, those times where I didn't trust my intuition, or I perhaps didn't read it properly, are also equally valuable. And so, sometimes you don't know that until retrospect. But intuition, when you don't trust it, because I mean, how many people have said, I should have trusted my gut. I knew that was going to happen. And I think that those are equally valid learning experiences. So what your intuition, how your intuition communicates, don't go there. I mean, I hear that a lot from people about relationships, especially when you're starting a relationship, you just so desperately want it to work out that you overlook certain things. But then when you kind of go back and look at maybe the first few dates, and you can kind of see the writing was on the wall, but you chose to ignore it. Or you can certainly make the same case for a job that you took that you shouldn't have. I mean, one of the other people I interviewed for the book was a PR person who was an entrepreneur, and she said she was in one of those periods where she was desperately in need of a client. Somebody had, a big client had fallen through, and she was really a little coming up short financially. And she said a guy approached her at a big project, And she said everything in her just kept saying, no, this guy was going to be a real pain in the neck and she shouldn't take it. And she really did decide in that case to trust her intuition. But she was kind of beating herself up going, oh, I really could have used the money and maybe it wasn't so bad and maybe I should call him up and see if I could get this gig back. And then she said she was at a party a couple of weeks later and she overheard somebody who had taken the job. And she said, oh, my gosh, I've got the client from hell. It's not worth any amount of money he gives me.
My God.
So it was like really one of those, aha moments where she realized she had trusted her intuition and it had saved her. But, again, you don't usually get those things happening to you that kind of prove to you that you had a good intuition.
Exactly. It would be nice if you
did. I know. If I were in charge of the universe, it would work that way. Alas, I am not.
But is it possible for people to really learn how to trust their intuition more? How can we do that?
Well, I think that I would say probably buy the book, put your intuition to work. That would be a great first step. My intuition says that you would like it a lot. There's also a lot of information on my website, by the way. It's lynnrobinson.com, and my first name is spelled Lynn, and I have a lot of resources there, articles, ebooks, and things like that you could download. But a lot of it is practicing. It's asking your intuition questions, getting into the habit of saying when you're making a decision, what is my intuition saying about that versus just diving ahead with a logical kind of decision. It's spending time writing things down, taking some time away from your desk, pushing away from your desk for even a minute or two at a time when you're facing a big decision. It's asking those open-ended questions. So those are, and also just paying attention to how you get the intuitive information. Again, feelings, words, images, dreams, gut feelings. Those are all the ways that it comes through.
Mm-hmm. Wow, and that's also another good point to make, that people have to pay attention to how they receive information because it may be different.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's some people who definitely get the physical sensation. Their gut will tell them right or wrong decision. For me, it doesn't come through that way so much. Not that my way is the right way and somebody else is the wrong way, but more, I get it more through feelings. I'm more of an empath. Often I'll get things in visual pictures, like symbolic pictures. Like I gave an intuitive reading to a client earlier, and he was trying to make a decision about something, and every time I imagined him doing it, I just got a big X through it. It's like that's the wrong thing. So, the picture's worth 1,000 words, as the cliche goes, and that's a great way that your intuition communicates with you. So that's another way to do it, is just to go, okay, I'm about to make a decision. I'm about to hire this person. What information do I get about her or him? And just see what symbolic pictures come up. I had a guy that I interviewed for the Put Your Intuition to Work book, and he had been offered 2 different jobs, and so we'll call them Company A and Company B. And so I had him do that technique that I mentioned earlier, we're trying a decision on for size, and he was like in the session with him, he was kind of pushing and saying, I think I should take the job with Company A. They're giving me a big promotion. There's going to be more money, and I think I should take this job. So I said, well, just try it on for size. Like, close your eyes and tell yourself, I'm taking this job with Company A. And so he did that, and then he almost immediately opened his eyes. And I said, what happened? And he said, well, it's sort of like the example I just chosen a few moments ago. He said, I got a big X through it. And why would that happen? Why did I get that? Because it's a good company. And, he started arguing in favor of it. And I said, well, let's just try it with Company B. And so I said, do the same exercise and close your eyes and say, I'm taking the job with Company B. And it almost seemed like a few minutes had gone by. And I finally said, well, so what's happening? And he said, I just feel like I'm happy there. I'm kind of seeing myself with my feet up on the desk and people are friendly. And he said, but, I think I should take that job with Company A. And so we didn't really decide. But at the end, I said, look, call me and let me know what you decided. And I didn't hear from him for a few months, and he called and left a message on my voicemail. He said, you're not going to believe this, but he said, I ended up taking the job with Company B for lots of reasons, but he said, I just found out Company A went bankrupt.
Oh, my goodness.
So, again, it's not that big megaphone going, Company A is going bankrupt, do not take that job. It really was more that his intuition gave him that symbolic picture. Don't go there. That's not the right answer. Big X through it. People might get different images, but that was his. So when you practice it long enough, you start to trust that. I mean, if I got an X over something, I just wouldn't do it. I might wonder why, but I wouldn't do it.
Wow, that's a terrific story. So, when your clients call you and those who feel like they're really in a rut or they just feel like they just are so overwhelmed with things that are going on, what do you suggest for people to so that they can do every day or regularly so they can really start to get themselves back together?
Well, I would say in part it's starting that process of what do you want versus what you don't want. I mean, a lot of people have a hard time doing it because their little inner critic is going, well, what I want isn't possible. I couldn't possibly do that, or I couldn't possibly have that. So I really try to tell people to try to put that voice aside and to really start thinking about, what do you enjoy on a daily basis? I mean, I tell people, look, if I can make a living at this, you can make a living in anything. I mean, because I had to start that in that place. Like, I really love intuition, but how the heck am I going to make a living at that? It was definitely something I had to sit with for a few years before I convinced myself that it was really possible. And I may not know how it was going to happen, but I've had so many weird experiences that when I decide the what I want, the universe has an amazing way of bringing about the how. And so I try not to focus on the how something's going to happen. I just try to focus on the what it is that I want. I mean, I've gotten to travel to many different countries and be a speaker in those countries. At first, I was like, how the heck am I going to do that? I don't really have a big travel budget. But I just said, okay, universe, and this is what I want. And so I just kind of visualize it like I do that 3-step technique. I write down what I want, I envision it, and I just keep saying, what 3 things can I do today to move in this direction? And I try to take action on those things. But a lot of people find that helpful, that technique, when either they're overwhelmed and stuck in a rut, overwhelmed with too much to do, or stuck in a rut and not taking any action. Because it really requires that you just take small steps. And, again, it's like you aim yourself in the direction that you want to go in and then just respond to whatever shows up along the way. And it's a pretty amazing process because I believe that your intuition wants you to succeed. It's there to be your inner guide for life, not to sound too woo-woo about it.
Well, it's true. I mean, it's there to help to guide you, and as you would say, I would think it's guiding you in a good direction. So that's what we have to really believe in.
Yes.
Your book includes some tips to overcome worry. What are some things that people can do for that?
Well, a lot of it's the self-talk that we mentioned before. It's kind of watching when you're worried about something and asking yourself, what is it that I want here? What's the most, what would be the best outcome? There's a lot of times when people call, and I'm sure you find this as a coach too, is that people are very focused on what they don't want to have happen. Oh my gosh, I'm so afraid this will happen. I'll lose my job, and I'll lose my spouse, and my kids won't like me, and my dog will run away. We get very, I think that there's a lot of fear that is out there right now for lots of reasons. So I tell people to really start paying attention to what do they want? If this did work out. And sometimes we can take what we're worried about and try to turn it into the opposite. Like I had a client recently that was just talking about, she was so worried that the job was getting away from her and she was working too many hours and she was just feeling really crazed. And it's like, oh my gosh, she was just totally overwhelmed talking to her. And I said, well, what is it that you want? And she said, I don't know. I really can't slow down enough to kind of figure it out. And so I said, well, the very first thing that comes to mind is I want a job or I want a lifestyle where I feel a lot more slowed down and I feel at peace with myself. And it's like you could just hear the energy in the room kind of going, ah. So it's really, and sometimes when we're worried about something, to really think about the qualities that we want in our life. We may not know the specific, like I want a new job or I want to work at XYZ company, or we may not know the specifics, but we may know the qualities that we want. So like I did this a few years ago where I felt like I was kind of like in a rut myself, and I couldn't figure out what was the next big goal I wanted, and nothing was resonating with me. And I finally realized that the things that I really wanted were more qualities. I wanted more of a sense of community and adventure and being of service. and a feeling of peace in my life. And so when I meditated and visualized, those were the qualities that I wanted to embrace and welcome into my life. So that really helps a lot when you're worrying, is to kind of figure out the what you want. What do you want your life to feel like, even if you don't know the specifics of how to get there? But that self-talk is so important in the worrying piece also, that when you find yourself worrying a lot, you just say, again, kind of stopping yourself and really consciously saying, what is it that I'm worrying about right now? And then stopping enough to say, what is it that I would want instead? I want good health. I'm choosing good health. I'm welcoming good health. And that kind of can calm down those worries too, making that a lot more conscious and asking your intuition for help and going in that direction.
That's very good advice, actually. I think so many people are on autopilot, and they, like you were saying, it's so running, and not really wanting to slow down and even think. And if you don't think, if you don't stop and listen, then you're not going to get all that good information.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah. And I guess I have another question. I guess everyone who's intuitive or considers themselves psychic, or however you define it, will get that question. But has anyone ever asked you about the lotto numbers?
You bet. So I actually have a funny story about that, because I did sort of win the lottery. Right after I got married, I woke up with 6 numbers in my head, and I couldn't get the numbers out of my head. I couldn't go back to sleep, and I'm like counting them, and it's like there's 6 numbers. So my husband's snoring beside me, and I said, honey, how many numbers are in the lottery? And I said, oh, I'm 6. And I said, I think I might have the lottery number. I've never seen him move so fast before or since. He had a paper, a pen. He was like ready to write the number down. And so I gave him the number. It's a Wednesday morning. He said, I'm going to play that on the way to work. I mean, I think that's so cool that you came up with those numbers. And so I kind of put it out of my mind. And it wasn't until Friday morning, we're having breakfast and reading the paper, having coffee. And I said, we should see if that number came in. And he looked a little sheepish. And he said, it got really busy on Wednesday, and I forgot to play it. And I said, well, I'm thinking to myself, the chances I came up with a lottery number probably slim to none. But I looked at the paper, and I said, I think that's the number. I think that's the number that I came up with. And he got his little slip of paper, and we compared it. And the day that he did not play my lottery number, it came in for $5.2 million.
Oh, my goodness.
I'm still married to him. And there's a long line of people who have requested that I call them first if I ever come up with a lottery number. Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
I know, and I've never come up with it again. I believe me, I sit with it. But, honestly, Deb, it was a real, as much as I had to get over being pissed at him, I also had to get over being pissed at myself. Because really, intuition, one of the ways you develop it is by acting on the information you get. You can't just get it and ignore it. And so, I realized I sort of passed it over to him. But, I should have played it. That was my intuition to play. And I would have kept all the money.
Wow. Well, I can't imagine what his reaction was.
Yeah, I know. It's 20 years later. We're still talking about that. If we played that number, usually it comes out, if you'd played that number. So it's been an interesting source of marital relations here.
Oh my God, that's a funny one now.
It wasn't at the time, believe me.
Well, certainly proof that when we get these messages that we should act on them and take them seriously. So that's an excellent example of it.
Yep, absolutely.
Oh, my goodness. So, Lynn, if you could please share with everyone again how they can find you.
Yeah, my website is lynnrobinson.com, and my first name is Lynn. And, again, lots of resources on my website, as well as information about my intuitive readings and speaking. And the book is called Put Your Intuition to Work, and the subtitle is How to Supercharge Your Inner Wisdom to Think Fast and Make Great Decisions.
Fantastic. And yes, I have my copies right on my
great.
Dining table where I can
you could make your decisions quickly.
Yes. Because that's what you need to do. Just kind of get yourself going and start to trust and start asking those questions. So this has really been a terrific conversation, and I'm sure we could go on
Yes.
and on with it. But are there any final thoughts that you feel that you just any points or anything that you just wanted to
Well,
make?
I think that the main thing is really to touch in with your intuition. I mean, even if you just kind of simply stop when you're about to make a decision and say, what's my intuition say? And just listen for that wisdom within. And I think that's probably the best technique of all.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's certainly something everyone can take away with them and really start to apply, right away.
Yeah, absolutely.
Get your book and check out your website. So there's a lot of good stuff out there.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Lynn. This was such a terrific conversation.
Okay. All right. Be well, Deb. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.